The night hung heavy over Millfield Colony, stars twinkling against the black canvas of space, visible through the protective dome. Sheriff James Miller yawned as he drove his patrol vehicle along the empty streets. The digital clock on his dashboard flashed 2:03 a.m., marking another quiet night shift in the small settlement at the edge of human expansion. His headlights swept across the storefronts, most dark and silent except for the eerie blue-white glow emanating from Starlight Laundromat. James frowned. This wasn't the first time he'd noticed activity there at such an unusual hour. Third time this week, he muttered to himself, pulling his vehicle to the curb. The colony had its share of night owls, but something about this pattern struck him as odd. Who needed to do laundry in the middle of the night with such regularity? Condensation had formed on the windows of the laundromat, blurring his view of the interior. James stepped out of his vehicle, the artificial climate control keeping the night air at a perfect 68 degrees despite the harsh conditions beyond the dome. As he approached, he wiped a small circle in the fogged glass with his sleeve. Through this makeshift window, he spotted her, a small black girl with her hair tied up in neat braids. She couldn't have been older than 12, yet here she was alone in the middle of the night. Her thin arms strained as she dragged a heavy canvas bag across the tile floor. Her movements seemed practiced, familiar with the routine. James pushed open the door, triggering the electronic bell that announced his entrance. The sound cut through the monotonous hum of the machines. The girl's head snapped up, her body freezing like a deer caught in headlights. Fear flashed across her face. Not the normal caution a child might show toward authority, but something deeper, more urgent. Her eyes darted toward the back exit. "Evening," James said, keeping his voice gentle and his stance relaxed. He'd learned long ago that his uniform and 6'3" frame could be intimidating, especially to children. "Don't mean to scare you. Just checking everything's okay." The laundromat smelled of detergent and warm air, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the girl's face. She wore a faded blue sweater that seemed a size too large, with sleeves that covered her hands. "I'm fine," she whispered, her eyes focused on a spot near his boots rather than meeting his gaze. "Just doing laundry." James took in the scene with a practiced eye. Despite the bag she'd been dragging, the washing machine in front of her stood empty. Only the dryer hummed away, tumbling what looked like a single blanket. Her own clothes, though worn at the edges, appeared clean. No parent in sight, no schoolbooks or entertainment devices to pass the time like most kids would have. "That's a lot of laundry for someone your size," he said conversationally, nodding toward her bag. She shifted uncomfortably, small fingers playing with the hem of her sweater. "My mom works nights. I help with chores." The explanation might have satisfied most, but James had been sheriff in Millfield for 15 years. The colony was small enough that he knew most families, especially those with children. This girl wasn't familiar, and something about her story didn't add up. "Where are your parents, sweetheart?" he asked, taking a careful step forward. The question triggered something. The girl lunged for her bag, scooping it up with surprising strength. Before James could react, she darted past him toward the exit. "Wait," he called, but didn't chase after her. Frightening her further wouldn't help. Instead, he moved to the window and watched as her small figure raced through the darkness. She didn't head toward the residential sectors, where family apartments were located, but toward the abandoned field behind the town, a neglected area where the original landing equipment had been left to rust after the colony's establishment. James stood there long after she disappeared from view, the hum of the still-running dryer the only sound in the empty laundromat. Something wasn't right, and the protective instinct that had made him become a sheriff in the first place wouldn't let him ignore it. "Who are you, little one?" he whispered to himself. "And what are you running from?" James didn't sleep that night. The image of the small girl disappearing into the darkness haunted him. By first light, he returned to the laundromat, armed with a flashlight and determination. The morning dew had settled on the ground overnight, leaving perfect tiny footprints in the soft dirt behind the building. "Let's see where you're hiding," he whispered to himself, following the trail across the abandoned field. Colony ships and equipment lay scattered throughout the area, relics from when humans first settled this planet 20 years ago. Most had been stripped for parts, their hulls standing like hollow skeletons against the rising sun. The footprints led straight to Colony Transport 37, one of the original landing shuttles. Unlike the others, this one seemed intact, its faded white surface covered with rust and local vegetation. Most colonists avoided this area, claiming it brought bad memories of the difficult early days. As James approached, he noticed small details that stood out. A makeshift path had been cleared leading to the shuttle's entry hatch. Someone had patched a section of the hull with scrap metal. Most telling of all, a thin wisp of smoke rose from a crude ventilation pipe jutting from the top. Someone was definitely living inside. He approached cautiously, his boots crunching on the gravel. When he got closer, he heard soft voices from within. A child's and an adult's, their conversation too muffled to make out the words. James stood at the sealed door, hesitating. As sheriff, he had every right to investigate, but something told him that banging on the door with official authority would only make things worse. Amara, he called gently, having overheard the girl's name in the whispered conversation. You in there? It's Sheriff Miller from last night. The voices inside went silent immediately. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. Then, with a metallic groan, the old shuttle door began to move. Rust flaked off as it slowly opened just enough to reveal the girl from the laundromat standing in the gap. Her chin was raised defiantly, but her eyes betrayed fear. I'm not doing anything wrong, she said, her small voice firm despite the slight tremble in her hands. This shuttle was abandoned. We're not hurting anyone. James nodded, keeping his distance to appear less threatening. I know. I just want to help. May I come in? Amara studied his face for a long moment, then stepped back, opening the door wider. You can come in, but please don't make us leave. We have nowhere else to go. The interior of the shuttle surprised James. Despite being an abandoned wreck from the outside, inside was meticulously clean and organized. The limited space had been transformed into a living area. Storage crates functioned as tables and chairs. Salvaged fabric hung as room dividers. Solar-powered lights rigged from scavenged parts provided a warm glow. But what caught James's attention was the woman lying in the corner on a makeshift bed of blankets and cushions. Her resemblance to Amara was unmistakable. The same eyes and facial structure. But where the child was vibrant with youth, the mother appeared hollowed out by illness. Her breathing came in labored gasps, and her skin had the yellowish tint that James recognized all too well. This is my mom, Amara said, moving to her mother's side and adjusting the thin blanket. Her name is Lena. The woman tried to sit up but lacked the strength. Please, she whispered, whatever you decide to do with me, my daughter isn't responsible for any of this. James knelt beside the bed, his heart heavy with recognition. Ma'am, I'm not here to cause trouble. I was concerned about your daughter being alone at night. Amara poured water from a recycled container into a chipped cup and helped her mother drink. Mom's sick, she explained. We had an apartment in the East Sector, but the hospital bills were too much. They evicted us 3 months ago. James's eyes moved to the small collection of medication bottles neatly arranged on a makeshift shelf. He picked one up, reading the label with a growing knot in his stomach. Lyseril B, the expensive cancer treatment medication. The same pills that had drained his savings during his wife's illness last year. The same pills that, in the end, hadn't been enough to save her. The colony healthcare system only covers basic treatments, Lena explained between labored breaths. These medications, I know how much they cost, James said softly. He set the bottle down and turned away, but not before Amara saw the tears welling in his eyes. The strong sheriff suddenly looked vulnerable, human. Your wife? Lena asked gently, recognizing the look of shared suffering. James nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Last year, he finally managed. Same diagnosis, looks like. Amara stepped closer, her earlier defensiveness melting away. "That's why I go to the laundromat," she explained. "It's warm there. And I can wash our things, and—" She hesitated. "Sometimes I sleep in the chair while the dryers run. The sound helps me forget I'm scared." James couldn't hold back his tears any longer. This brave child, this sick mother, fighting against impossible odds just as he and Sarah had done. Except they were doing it alone, hidden in an abandoned shuttle, with no one to help them bear the burden. "You're not alone anymore," he promised, wiping his eyes. "Not anymore." For 2 weeks, James visited the shuttle daily. He brought food, blankets, and medicine that he claimed were extras from the colony supplies. No one questioned the sheriff about a few missing items, and he made sure to cover his tracks. Each day, Lena seemed to breathe a little easier thanks to the regular medication, though James knew the treatment was buying time, not a cure. On this particular evening, James arrived with a portable heater. The colony's artificial climate kept temperatures moderate, but the metal shuttle walls grew cold at night. He found Amara kneeling beside an open panel in the wall, her small hands deftly manipulating wires and components that James couldn't identify. "The heating system keeps failing," Lena explained from her bed. She looked better today, her eyes brighter as she watched her daughter work. "Amara's fixing it." Again. James set down his supplies and watched in amazement. The girl's fingers moved with confidence through the complex machinery, connecting wires and adjusting settings with the skill of a trained engineer. This was no simple repair. These were complex systems that most adults wouldn't understand. "Where did you learn to do that?" James asked, crouching beside her. Amara shrugged without looking up. "I just know how they fit together." A soft hum filled the shuttle as the heating system came back online. Amara closed the panel and wiped her hands on her pants, a small smile of satisfaction on her face. "She's special," Lena whispered to James as Amara moved to another part of the shuttle to organize their supplies. "That's why we hide." James raised an eyebrow, waiting for more explanation, but Lena simply shook her head and mouth later. He nodded, understanding the need for discretion around the child. Over the next few days, James noticed more unusual things. The shuttle's lighting worked perfectly despite being disconnected from the colony's power grid. The air inside was fresh and clean, though the ventilation system should have failed years ago. Somehow, Amara kept everything running. One night, James arrived later than usual. The colony council meeting had run long, with troubling reports about system failures in sectors across the settlement. As he approached the shuttle, he noticed an unusual blue glow through the windows. He entered quietly, not wanting to disturb Lena if she was sleeping. The sight inside stopped him in his tracks. Amara stood with her back to him, her hands pressed firmly against the shuttle's main control panel. A system dead for decades, but it wasn't dead now. The screens glowed with pulsing blue light, displaying symbols unlike any human language. They shifted and changed as if responding to Amara's touch. The girl's eyes were closed, her face peaceful, almost as if she were listening to music only she could hear. "How are you doing that?" James gasped, unable to contain his shock. Amara's eyes snapped open, and the screens instantly went dark. She turned to face him, looking guilty, like a child caught stealing sweets. "I just hear them," Amara said simply, her voice soft. "The machines talk to me." "She was born with it," Lena said from her bed. She seemed resigned, as if a secret she'd long protected was finally being revealed. "It's time you knew the truth, James. You've earned that much." Lena patted the edge of her bed, inviting James to sit. When he did, she began a story that chilled him to the bone. "Before Amara was born, I worked on the first alien contact mission," she explained. "Remember the artifacts they found in the northern mountains? The government claimed they were just ruins, but they were so much more." James remembered. The discovery had caused excitement across Earth and the colonies, proof of intelligent alien life that had once inhabited this planet. but information had been sparse, classified. While studying the artifacts, several of us who were pregnant were exposed to unknown radiation. Lena continued. They didn't tell us until it was too late. Most of the babies died before birth. The ones who survived. She looked at Amara with a mixture of pride and fear. They were different. Different how? James asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. They could interact with technology in ways no human could, especially the alien systems no one could decipher. The government wanted to study them, use them. They took 3 children before we realized what was happening. Lena's voice broke. We ran. Been running ever since. Amara returned to her mother's side, taking her hand. The machines have memories, she explained to James, her voice far more mature than her years. They remember the ones who made them. Sometimes they show me things about this world before humans came. James tried to process what he was hearing. If true, Amara wasn't just a gifted child. She was something unprecedented, a bridge between human and alien technology. Who else knows about this? He asked. The government has a special division tracking us, Lena said. If they find us. She didn't need to finish the sentence. James understood the implications immediately. Children as research subjects. Life in a laboratory. He thought of his oath to uphold colonial law, then looked at Amara's innocent face. In that moment, his decision was made. They won't find you, he promised. Not while I'm around. Life in the colony continued for 3 more weeks with James helping Amara and Lena remain hidden. He brought news, supplies, and spent hours listening to Amara explain her connection to the machines. The girl's abilities fascinated him, though he still struggled to fully understand them. On the 23rd day since he'd found them, James woke to the high-pitched wail of emergency sirens. His communication device buzzed with urgent messages as he threw on his uniform. Outside, colonists were already gathering in the streets, faces tight with fear. Attention all residents, boomed the automated voice through colony-wide speakers. This is not a drill. The radiation shield is experiencing critical failure. All citizens report to emergency shelters immediately. Prepare for possible evacuation. James knew what this meant. The radiation shield was the colony's primary protection against the planet's harsh environment. Without it, the deadly radiation would penetrate the settlement within hours. He ran straight to the shuttle, finding Lena much worse than the day before. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale and waxy. What's happening? Amara asked, her voice small as the sirens continued to wail. The shield is failing, James explained, trying to keep his voice calm despite his racing heart. They're talking about evacuation. Lena's eyes opened at this news. With visible effort, she reached for James's hand. The backup systems, she whispered. The aliens built redundancies into everything. What do you mean? James asked. Amara can help, her mother insisted, now barely able to speak. Take her to the control center. She can access the original systems, the ones we built our colony on top of. James hesitated. Taking Amara to the colony's control center would expose her to the authorities, the very people Lena had been hiding from. They'll take her away, he said. Lena's grip tightened on his wrist with surprising strength. Better captured than dead, she said. And if she can save everyone. Amara stepped forward, her small face set with determination. I can do it, Sheriff. I've seen the sleeping systems in my mind. I just need to reach them. James looked between mother and daughter, then made his decision. I'll get you there. The streets were chaos as James led Amara through back alleys toward the colony headquarters. His sheriff's uniform got them past the first security checkpoint, but the central building was locked down, with armed guards at every entrance. We need a distraction, James muttered, surveying the scene. As if answering his thought, a massive power surge rippled through the colony. Lights flickered and died, plunging sections into darkness. In the confusion, James slipped Amara through a service entrance. The control center was a hive of frantic activity. Engineers shouted across consoles while government officials demanded updates. On the main screen, a diagram showed the shield's failing sections in angry red. Evacuation ships can only take 30% of the population, a technician was saying, and launch windows are closing fast due to the radiation spike. Governor Chen paced the floor, his face ashen. Keep working on the shield. There must be something we missed. James took a deep breath and stepped forward with Amara. Governor Chen, I believe we have a solution. All eyes turned to them. A sheriff and a small girl, both looking out of place in the high-tech control room. What are you doing here, Miller? And who is this child? The governor demanded. Her name is Amara. She has a special ability to interface with technology, including the alien systems beneath our colony. The governor's face hardened. This is no time for nonsense, Sheriff. Get back to your evacuation duties. Let her try, James insisted, his voice rising. What do we have to lose? A technician interrupted. Sir, shield collapse in 15 minutes. Radiation will reach lethal levels shortly after. The governor looked at James, then at Amara, desperation overriding his skepticism. What can a child do that our best engineers cannot? Without waiting for permission, Amara approached the central console. It contained elements of the original alien technology, modified with human components. The engineers backed away, watching with mixtures of confusion and hope. These are just the surface controls, Amara explained, her fingers hovering over the panels. The real systems are deeper. She placed her hands on the alien portion of the console and closed her eyes. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, symbols began appearing on screens throughout the room, ancient script that had never been fully translated. She's accessing systems we didn't even know existed, whispered one of the engineers in awe. The aliens built backups, Amara explained, her eyes still closed as her fingers moved across the console with precision. But they're sleeping. I can wake them. A man in a dark uniform pushed through the crowd. Stop her immediately. That child is a research subject, government property. James recognized the insignia of the special division Lena had warned him about. As the man moved to grab Amara, James stepped between them. Touch her, and you'll regret it, he growled. She's saving all our lives. More security personnel entered, surrounding them. But no one dared interrupt as Amara worked, tears now streaming down her face from the mental strain of connecting with the ancient technology. The original inhabitants knew the radiation cycles, she said, her voice distant, as if speaking from within a dream. They built a secondary shield network. I can redirect power to it. But I need time. Shield collapse in 5 minutes, announced the system. Give her the time, James ordered, standing guard over the girl who had become like a daughter to him, willing to risk everything to let her work. The morning sunlight streamed through the large windows of what once had been Starlight Laundromat. The space had been transformed completely. The washing machines and dryers removed and replaced with interactive learning stations. Where there had once been folding tables, now stood holographic displays showing both human and alien script. James leaned against the doorframe, watching with pride as Amara guided a group of children through an exercise. Her hands moved gracefully above a complex interface, the symbols responding to her touch like musical notes to a conductor. The original inhabitants didn't see technology as separate from nature, she explained to the attentive faces. They built systems that grew and adapted like living things. A small boy raised his hand. Can I try? Amara smiled. Of course, Eli. Remember, don't force it. Just listen. The boy placed his hands where Amara had shown him. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a dim glow appeared beneath his fingers. His face lit up with wonder. I feel it, he exclaimed. It's like it's humming. That's exactly right, Amara said, her face beaming with pride. 1 year had passed since the day everything changed. 1 year since Amara had prevented the colony's destruction by awakening ancient protective systems no human engineer had known existed. The alien shield had deployed just as the human-built one failed completely, saving everyone in the settlement. The days following that crisis had been difficult. Lena had passed away peacefully 3 days after the shield was restored, holding both Amara's and James's hands as she slipped away. James had wept alongside Amara, their grief binding them as family in a way no official document could. The Government Research Division had immediately tried to take custody of Amara. They arrived with papers and armed escorts, citing national security and research priorities. But James had been prepared. The colony's survival had made Amara a hero, and he'd made sure everyone knew it. When agents came to claim her, they found not just a stubborn sheriff blocking their way, but hundreds of colonists standing in protection. Governor Chen himself had intervened, granting James emergency guardianship. The legal battles that followed lasted months, but in the end, James had officially adopted Amara. More importantly, the truth about the first contact children had been made public. Records were unsealed, and families who had been hiding children like Amara came forward. Instead of fear or mistrust, the colony had embraced these special children as bridges to understanding the alien technology they'd been living alongside for decades. The integration center had been Amara's idea. "If I can teach others what I know," she had told James, "maybe we can really learn to live here properly, the way the original inhabitants meant." James checked his watch. It was time to head home for dinner. He caught Amara's eye and pointed to his wrist. She nodded, finishing her lesson. As the children filed out, chattering excitedly about what they'd learned, Amara gathered her things. She'd grown taller over the past year, her face losing some of its childish roundness. But her eyes remained the same, wise beyond her years, with a spark of curiosity that never dimmed. "Good session today?" James asked as they stepped outside into the colony's main street. "The best yet," Amara replied. "Eli's really starting to connect. He might be even better at it than me someday." They walked together through the bustling colony. People nodded respectfully as they passed, some stopping to chat briefly with Amara about the center's progress. The fear that had once forced her to hide was gone, replaced by admiration and gratitude. Their path took them past the Memorial Park, where Colony Transport 37 had once stood. The shuttle itself had been carefully preserved and moved to the Colony Museum, but in its original location now stood a simple stone marker. Inscribed on it were the names of all first contact workers who had been exposed to the radiation, and their children, both those who had survived and those who hadn't. Amara paused at the memorial, as she often did, running her fingers over her mother's name. "Why did you help me that night?" she asked suddenly, looking up at James. "At the laundromat. You could have just reported us. It would have been easier." James considered the question carefully. He thought of Sarah, his wife, and how she had faced her final days with grace and compassion despite her pain. "Because someone once told me that true humanity isn't about survival," he replied, his voice soft with memory. "It's about seeing someone in need and helping, even when you're scared." He smiled. "Your mother reminded me of that. And you showed me how important it is." Amara reached for his hand, her small fingers interlacing with his larger ones. She squeezed gently as they continued walking, passing the spot where their journey together had begun. "Mom would be proud of what we've built," she said. "She would," James agreed. "Of you most of all." Above them, the alien shield shimmered invisibly, protecting the colony from harm. But James knew the real protection came from something else, something the original inhabitants and humans shared despite their differences. As they turned toward home, the last rays of sunlight caught the memorial stone, making it glow with warmth. Like the laundromat that had become a place of learning, like the shuttle that had become a home, like the sheriff and the girl who had become family. It stood as a reminder that humanity's greatest strength was never technology, but compassion.